Greetings everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. Developer High North Studios was kind enough to provide me with an early review key for Skald against the Black Priory. Some of you will remember I showed off about an hour of gameplay from this title a couple of years back, and now we finally have the full release. After 30 hours, I have finished a full playthrough of the game, and I'm excited to review it with all of you. For those who are new here at Slandered Gaming, we focus on CRPGs, so if that kind of content interests you, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Let's get into my thoughts, starting with what I like. Right at the beginning, when you load up this game, it hits you with a couple of very distinctive features. The first is obviously the graphics. I know it'll be a turnoff for many players, but personally I am a big fan of the retro style look. I wasn't allowed to play video games when I was a kid, so this visual flair predates even the oldest games that I have played. Despite this, a lot of what's provided fits right in with more modern titles. The art is distinctive and absolutely gorgeous. Character models are clearly differentiated, and when you put new equipment on characters, it'll be visually displayed, making it easy to know who you are looking at. The environments are varied, layered, and visually engrossing to traverse. There was honestly never a time where I got tired of the visual style, and I think it really helps set this game apart. The other feature that is immediately apparent is the music, some of which you are hearing in the background. It's 16-bit synth and very distinctive from most gaming soundtracks you hear today. At first I was just okay with the music, but by the end of this adventure I absolutely loved it because the vibe fit this game like a glove. There's only half a dozen tracks, so considering the game is going to be 20 hours plus for most people, it could probably use a little bit more variety, but what's there is absolutely fantastic. Side note, the composer is named Romanus Sert, and he is a game developer. I'll leave a Steam link for a CRPG called Dragon Ruins in the description below. There's also some interesting setting options in the game. Under gameplay, you can choose the style and color of the dice roll when checking your skills. You also can decide how often tutorials pop up during the game, if at all, and make adjustments to the tactical icons that show up during combat. There are 4 difficulty options: narrative, easy, normal, or hard. Obviously, each one will adjust the stats of enemies you face, but it will also determine how many rerolls you get during skill checks. So if your difficulty is set to easy, you will reroll failed skill checks twice, and you will reroll damage once, taking the highest result. Enemies will also get less rerolls. This will also impact whether or not you heal after every encounter, whether you need to eat food, or if encumbrance is even a factor for you. An interesting level of flexibility to craft the exact experience that you want. You also have control over the way fonts are presented in the game, which is a big deal because you will need to do quite a bit of reading. You can change the dialogue font, description font, their colors, and the background. Definitely something you should look at if you are having any trouble reading the default text. When you start up a new game, you'll get into character creation, another really strong point of Skald. After choosing the visual style you prefer and your difficulty, the game will provide you with a list of classes, but let's first skip over that and circle back. After selecting your class, you get to select a background. There's no in-game reactivity to this selection, so it's strictly about the mechanics you prefer. Some of them are really nice for specific classes, such as Acolyte, which will increase your attunement or mana while also providing a bonus to lore, a very important skill. Other options will help you regardless of class, such as Savant, which provides a 10% bonus to XP. Choose whatever works for you. Next up is your attributes and skills. This is the only time the game will let you access this screen, so it's really important you get it right. You get 5 points to spend on attributes and 6 points to spend on skills. You can increase an attribute by 3 and a skill by up to +4, giving you some wiggle room to add points into areas that aren't core to your class. Later in the game, you can get items or feats which will increase these values, but it will always be +1, so this is the largest bonus these ranks will experience your entire playthrough. Let's first talk about skills and then circle back to attributes. Athletics is a very important skill to have. There are a ton of areas where you can climb up or jump over gaps in order to get better positioning or reach certain areas faster. Also, when traveling the global map, if you are confronted with a random encounter that you want to avoid, the game will randomly decide to check your stealth or your athletics to measure whether or not you can get around it. Also, athletics determines how affected you are by encumbrance from armor, which impacts you in different ways depending on the body part. Encumbrance in your hands impacts thievery, encumbrance in your feet impacts stealth, encumbrance in your head impacts awareness, and encumbrance in your chest impacts how easy you are to hit, your ability to stealth, and your athletics ranking. Having a high encumbrance tolerance allows you to wear heavier armor without these stats being negatively impacted. Classes that don't focus on strength usually have access to feats that allow you to wear light armor without encumbrance, so everybody on your team doesn't need this, but at least one of you should specialize in it. Awareness measures your ability to notice hidden details in the environment. This can be loot or even hidden doors and pathways that reveal secret locations. This is more like a nice to have. Obviously, extra loot and fighting hidden things is great, but if you don't have it, it's not like you are going to miss it. Crafting comes into play when you are using a crafting station and gives you a chance to create a larger amount of items. It also allows you to craft arrows while resting. If you heavily use bows, this skill is absolutely essential because you are constantly running out of them, and crafting will help you create new ones. It will also help you create more health potions, which is important if your tactics are weak or you are playing on a harder difficulty. Otherwise, I would say it's not a big deal and you can skip it. Diplomacy gives you better prices when shopping. I started with a rank of 7 in this skill, and I still spent the majority of my playthrough feeling short on money. It's probably worth investing into it heavily, as there's a very finite amount of income available in the game, and some of the high tier equipment is very expensive. Healing affects how much vitality you regain when resting or using potions, along with occasionally coming into play during conversations. Keep in mind this has nothing to do with healing spells, so you can have someone who serves as your healer but has a very low ranking in this skill. Also keep in mind that dialogue checks are performed by whoever is speaking. The other party member's skill ranks are irrelevant. Therefore, if you want to pass healing dialogue checks, you need a decent rank with whoever is going to do the majority of the talking. I had a rank of 4 in this skill, cleared the vast majority of checks, and never felt motivated to raise it any higher. Lore is another critical skill that measures your general knowledge. It's heavily used in dialogue, so this, along with healing, are the most important skills for someone who prefers to talk. Even more importantly, when resting, you can pass lore checks to train the party and provide everyone with bonus XP. You can even have 2 characters both train while resting and provide double XP bonuses. I did this and still didn't reach the max level until an hour or so before the end. So the increase is definitely impactful. Also, it's a long time before you get a party member who is focused on lore, so creating a main character who is skilled in this area is very useful. Stealth is also very important because you can sneak up on the vast majority of enemies, which oftentimes gives you a free round of actions before they can react. It's also sometimes used when you are traveling the global map to avoid random encounters. You will absolutely want at least one party member heavily skilled in this area. Survival is used to forage for food and to pass checks that test your knowledge of nature. I don't remember any of the skill checks being particularly impactful, so the foraging part is much more important because food is critical in this game. Every time you rest, you'll need to use food in order to gain back vitality. The more party members you have, the more food that's required to do this. Meals that you have to cook provide more points than just individual ingredients. Consequently, it becomes important to discover recipes, find food, and then locate cooking stations where you can cook meals that are then consumed during rest. You pick up a lot of food exploring, so I wouldn't say it's critical to have this covered, but it's definitely nice to have, especially if you are playing on higher difficulties and resting a lot. Finally, thievery is yet another critical skill that allows you to open locked doors and chests. Like any other RPG, you absolutely want someone on your team with high ranks here. Alright, now that we have covered skills, let's circle back to attributes. Ranks in agility will increase your stealth and thievery skills, so obviously it's essential for a stealthy type of character. It also increases your chance to hit with ranged weapon attacks, making it great for characters focused in archery. This doesn't apply to magic attacks, as those automatically hit unless the enemy is immune to the type of spell you are using. Notice that I didn't mention ranged weapon damage, nor is it listed anywhere on the sheet. Classes which specialize in bows have feats that provide an increase in bow damage, and it's critical that you select them. Agility will also increase your critical chance and dodge. Dodge measures how difficult you are to hit, and it's especially nice for characters who have to wear lighter armor. Crits increase your damage by an amount that depends on the weapon, but regardless, the bonus is significant. Finally, this attribute will also increase your initiative, which of course determines how early you act in the turn rotation. This is a big deal because killing enemies can cause their allies to panic and skip their turn that round. The earlier your team can act, the more likely they can trigger this effect and potentially create a loop where you are killing enemies and freezing their friends to the point that most of the group never even gets a turn. This again is why stealthing into fights is so beneficial and also reinforces why agility is important. Fortitude will increase your ranks in survival. It will also increase toughness, which allows you to resist disease and poison. There are plenty of enemies who will attempt to inflict both on your party members, so this is critical for frontline characters. Fortitude will also increase your vitality and wounds. Skald uses a health system where vitality is almost like armor, protecting your real health, and wounds represents how much your character is actually being injured by attacks. Enemies need to pierce through vitality first before they can start wounding you. Vitality can easily be restored using potions or spells, while wounds will apply debuffs on your character and can only be cleared by resting. Intellect will increase your craft and lore skills. If you are a magos or mage, this attribute will also increase your attunement, which again counts as mana. That's not mentioned in the tooltip because which attribute provides you with more attunement is determined by the class you play. So clerics gain attunement from presence and warriors gain it from strength, even though they don't use it. If you are playing a Magos, then how much attunement your character has will directly correlate with how often you have to rest, so this will be a critical attribute. Presence will increase your awareness, diplomacy, and healing. It will also increase your willpower, which determines how much you can withstand mind-affecting conditions from spells. This is absolutely critical because enemies love to stun you or send you into a panic. Clerics most especially benefit from this because if they can resist the effect, sometimes they'll have spells that remove the effect from the rest of the party. Once again, presence is also critical for clerics so they have enough attunement to regularly cast their spells. Last on the list is strength, which increases athletics. It also increases your ability to hit and damage enemies with melee attacks. A class that combines high strength with accuracy and damage bonus feats can absolutely tear enemies apart on the battlefield. Alright, now let's circle back to classes. The mechanics here are fantastic, and every option provides a unique playstyle. I'm going to walk through the list of classes along with telling you which ones your party members have covered. When you recruit party members, their class along with their attribute and skill ranks are locked. However, their feat sheet is completely blank, so you are able to manually select the talents you want them to have. Keep in mind that this game also lets you hire mercenaries, who can be assigned any class you choose. Arms Master is all about picking up whatever weapon you prefer and hammering enemies with it. Your primary attribute is Strength, making this a perfect character to focus on athletics and front lining. You can use any armor and any weapon, along with receiving high HP increases every time you level up. You also get more initial development points, which are used to increase your feats. It's probably the easiest class to play and one of the most powerful as well. You'll have access to heavy armor feats and it's one of the few classes that is able to increase your damage with two-handed weapons, which are bananas in this game. The obvious drawback is that every fight you are just swinging a weapon. There are combat maneuvers you can use in specific situations, and positioning is a big deal, so it's more tactical than that, but still, this class won't provide the variety that some other options can give you. One of your party members is an arms master, and you get him very early, so that might also be a good reason to skip this class. Next on the list is Battle Magos. This class lets you cast destructive spells while also providing light weapon feats, making it viable to use short swords and or bows during combat. This significantly helps you manage your attunement. If you are a Magos who runs out of attunement and you don't have any attunement potions, you'll pretty much be dead in the water unless you have this class. Battle Magos receive less HP every level up, but they receive an increase in attunement. For some reason, attunement is referred to as magic on this screen, but the stat serves the same purpose. Your main stat is intellect, so this class is perfect when you want to focus on lore to get XP while resting and crafting to get more arrows and potions. The drawback to Battle Magos is that you focus on fire at the expense of the other two elements, losing feat options that would allow you to access higher level spells in air and earth. In my experience, while fire is fantastic, to get the most out of it, you need to be up close. There's a fireball option later which can hit a ton of enemies, but the damage it does is mediocre. I say in my experience because how the game handles magic has changed since the time I played it. When I played the game, you had to find books to gain new spells, and they were very rare and expensive. Consequently, I only had a handful of spells to use. In the updated version of the game, you will be able to select new spells upon reaching a higher rank, which ensures you constantly have new spells to play with. It's very possible I missed some really cool destructive or divine spells that help flesh out a spellcasting build. Circling back to Battle Magos, they cannot wear armor, and the dependency on fire magic pushes you to operate within melee range when you are essentially defenseless. This is viable if your team is strong and you have good tactics, but it's definitely something you will need to manage. None of your party members are Battle Magos. Champion is essentially a battle cleric, allowing you to use a limited amount of divine spells while also wielding heavier weapons. Your main attribute is presence, so this class is fantastic if you want to focus on lower store prices, discovering hidden objects, easier healing with potions and while resting, and higher resistance against mind-altering spells. You can use any armor along with any weapon that is of the blade or club type. This includes two-handed weapons, which I've already mentioned are amazing in this game, and you have feats to increase their damage. You'll also get increases in both health and attunement in very good amounts as you level up. The drawback of choosing this class is that it doesn't allow you to access high-level divine spells, only mid-tier at best. Personally, I think the drawbacks are acceptable, and if I was to play the game again, this is probably the class I would choose. None of your party members are champions. Guild Magos are essentially pure mages who are able to access the highest tiers of all types of destructive magic. This is very powerful as there are a wealth of spells for both damaging and debuffing enemies. Similar to Battle Magos, their main attribute is intelligence. Unfortunately, there's no feat which lets you cast spells multiple times in one turn, whereas martial characters can perform attacks 2 or even 3 times in one go. The only exception I've seen is the magic missile spell, which can be casted with a move action, so you can cast a second time as a regular action. Outside of that option, Magos usually don't do as much single target damage as your more physical party members. On the other hand, many of their spells will hit more than one enemy at a time, and the ones you have to be closer to use are very powerful. So oftentimes the character won't deliver a killing blow, but they will soften enemies up enough that another martial character can finish them off. The drawback is that you are vulnerable since Guild Magos receive very little health upon leveling up and they cannot use armor. You have access to light weapons but no feats to make them more accurate or deal more damage. This is the class I finished Skald with and it was a fun time, but again I definitely felt like party members were dealing more damage than me and that got to be an annoyance by the end of the game. You get one Guild Magos party member, but she doesn't come until much later later, and you can build her in a different way from your main character. My main character focused on fire and earth spells, while she focused on fire and air spells, and we complemented each other very well. Hierophant is a pure cleric who is able to use the highest level of divine spells. Similar to Champion, their main attribute is presence. I haven't seen any of the high level divine spells, so I cannot comment whether or not they are worth having. I have seen the low and mid tier spells, and while they are very powerful, the vast majority of the ones I saw requested you to be within melee range. While you can wear light armor, this class gets no combat feats whatsoever, so you will definitely be vulnerable when close to the action. You will get a nice amount of health every level up and a good amount of attunement as well. Obviously, if you enjoy being a cleric, go for it. There are no party members who are a Hierophant. Hospitaller is a cleric who focuses more on divine powers compared to the martial focus of Champion. You will still have access to light or medium armor, and you can wield light or medium clubs. That's very limiting, but clubs are fantastic in this game due to a club ability that allows you to stun all nearby enemies. You will also get a nice amount of health and attunement every level up. Hospitaller can access the most powerful healing spells available in the game. That's a big deal, which increases the survivability of the entire team. You'll not only be able to heal damage, but also remove poisons and diseases which enemies regularly use. You also get access to mid-tier mind and spirit spells to assist in debuffing and damaging enemies. You get one party member who has this class, but two is in a crowd, since you could have one who focuses more on their martial prowess with some healing thrown in, while another focuses strictly on divine spells and auras. Officer is a warrior who is focused on making the team better as opposed to their own individual prowess in battle. Like Arms Master, their main attribute is strength. You can use any armor and all types of weapons, along with getting a large bonus to health at every level. You'll get multiple buffs that automatically target all your allies on the field. Many of them are useful options, such as removing fear and panic statuses from allies or improving their chance to hit. The only issue with this is if you aren't planning to purchase mercenaries, you will spend the majority of the game without a full party. Money is very hard to come by, so investing in multiple mercenaries isn't a small sacrifice, but if you use this class, it's probably worth spending the money to fill your group out until you are able to recruit more characters. None of your party members are officers. Next on the list is Ranger, which are warriors who focus on ranged combat, and they have a small selection of nature spells. Similar to Champion, their main attribute is presence. They can use any armor along with all types of weapons. This class will provide you with a large amount of health and a small amount of attunement upon every level up. Rangers can mark enemies, which makes them easier to hit. You can also access passive abilities which activate upon killing a marked foe, including one that heals your entire party for a small amount. You can potentially trigger these effects multiple times in one fight, so even a small vitality increase can make a big difference. While you have the option of using melee or ranged attacks, I would focus on ranged because this class provides more accuracy bonuses for your bow. I didn't use nature magic at all, so I cannot tell you how effective it is. One of your party members is a ranger, and I would say the mechanics aren't good enough to warrant two of them in the same party, so I would skip this class. Last on the list is Thief, a character who utilizes stealth to execute backstab attacks on enemies, resulting in a massive damage increase. Their main attribute is stealth, making this character a perfect fit if you want to play someone stealthy who focuses on ranged damage and is also an expert at picking locks. Backstabbing is available if you attack while stealth and if the enemy is flanked or vulnerable. Thief gets abilities that allow them to manually stealth, start combat stealth, and automatically become stealth when they are attacked. Enemies are flanked if they have opponents on either side of them. They are vulnerable if they cannot defend themselves, such as opponents who have been stunned. Clerics and mages have multiple ways to stun enemies, and there are only a handful of late-game foes who cannot be stunned. There are also multiple party members who benefit from being within melee range, and it's easy to surround enemies, so all the way around, triggering backstabs regularly is simple as long as you are focused on doing that. This class gives you a ton of increases to backstab damage, so you can really shred opponents as long as they are set up for it. Also keep in mind that backstabs are separate from critical hits, and the light weapons Thief uses get larger than usual crit damage bonuses, so this further multiplies how bananas the damage numbers can get. Of course, the flip side is when you cannot backstab, which is especially common in the first couple of rounds when you are still setting up positioning, the usefulness of this class in combat plummets. You do get one party member who is a thief, but again, it's not a crowd because you could have one thief who focuses on range damage and another thief who focuses more on melee damage. Shortly after choosing a class, you'll be able to select options in the feat tree. Each class gets a certain amount of development points that can be spent here, and you'll get 3 upon every level up. Each feat has 6 ranks, and you'll get specific perks at ranks 1, 3, and 6. Higher level feats require you to be a specific character level before you can put points there. The interesting thing about this system is you only have to take 1 rank in a feat level to unlock the next level as long as you have the appropriate character level. So for example, if I took the first rank in Calloused Hands, which provides the Charger perk, increasing my hit chance when charging, then as long as I was at least level 5, I could go ahead and take the first rank in Brutality, which is Vicious, providing an increase to critical chance. Consequently, there's a ton of flexibility to bounce around and get different feats and perks that you want. You get 3 skill points every level, and the level cap is 20. So there's not enough to get everything on the sheet, but there's certainly more than enough to put together a satisfactory build. Now, taking a step back and putting this all together, you can see there's a ton of options for character creation within a system that is both deep and very easy to understand. Really great setup, and I think a lot of players will appreciate what's provided here. Once you are finished with character creation and a brief tutorial mission, you'll quickly find yourself stranded on an island alone with no equipment. Through a phenomenal flashback mission, the game provides you with the premise. The daughter of a powerful lord, who is also a childhood friend, has gone missing. Considering your relationship with her and your reputation for resourcefulness, her father asks you to find her. That probably sounds like a run-of-the-mill beginning to an adventure, but the way it's handled is unique and absolutely fantastic. There are additional flashbacks within this mission, revealing the daughter to be troubled, and your relationship with her father is complicated for reasons I won't spoil here. A ton of role-playing is packed just in those 30 minutes, allowing you to flesh out who your character really is. That incredible writing carries over throughout your adventure. This is definitely one of the most well-written games I've ever experienced, consistently presenting you with mature, distinct characters who are doing their best in an insane situation. Speaking of which, you quickly discover that the island you are stranded on is being plagued by evil creatures that are slowly driving everyone insane. Families are turning against each other, and entire populations are being slaughtered in droves. Terrifying enemies are in every nook and cranny, using all of their abilities to decimate your team. While the stories are completely different, playing this game reminded me a lot of my first experience with Pillars of Eternity, a very dark game where virtually everyone you meet is in a place of despair, and you have to decide to be a beacon of light or help the darkness spread. Speaking of despair, darkness, and terrifying enemies, the combat encounters are absolutely punishing in a great way. Many environments are darkened, which makes it hard to see unless you are using a lantern, which will make it more difficult to be stealthy. Enemies can blend into the darkened environments, which makes it very easy to unexpectedly stumble upon them and trigger combat. While in stealth, there are 2 indications that you are close to enemies. First, there will be a percentage on the top of your head, and if it starts going down, that means enemies are nearby and getting close to discovering you. Also, the first button on your hotbar is for attack, and it will only light up when there are enemies who you can fight. Clicking this button will trigger combat and allow you to get the jump on opponents. Fights will always start with you being able to position your characters, but stealthing towards enemies will let you get closer before triggering combat, and in turn, you will be able to position frontline characters closer to where enemies are. Otherwise, you run the risk of them taking the path around your front line to pick off soft targets. Characters with higher stealth values can sneak much closer to enemies before their percentage gets too low. Once combat starts, participants will act according to initiative. Each character gets a specific amount of movement points and one action point. Most actions that you perform, such as attacking, will use your action point and consequently can only be done once per turn. A few actions can be performed using a movement point, such as a cleric healing a character with lay on hands or a magos casting magic missile. Also, as I mentioned before, some classes can gain passives which provide them with an additional action. Arms masters can eventually attack twice per turn. They can gain an additional attack when landing a crit, and they can gain an additional attack when killing an enemy with a heavy weapon. Bananas. Moving away from an enemy who has engaged you in melee uses an action point. If you are adjacent to a party member who is standing where you want to be, you can switch places with them, and that also uses your action point, unless you are a thief who can take a feat to do this for free. Even if you get the jump on enemies, some of them may be immune to being surprised and act on the first round. Many opponents hit like trucks, and they can use status effects that debuff stats or flat out stun you. Boss enemies can deal tremendous amounts of damage multiple times, making controlling the battlefield absolutely critical. Effective positioning and smart tactics are important throughout the entire playthrough. The last thing I'll mention that I really liked about combat is that it doesn't rely on sending waves of enemies at you during fights. When combat starts, 90% of the time what you see is what you get, and the game provides difficulty via the effectiveness of enemies you face, not just large amounts of them. There are some aspects of the game I am neutral on, and the first one is exploration. Skald is clearly a game that prides itself on not holding the player's hand, which I know is music to the ears of many of you. Personally, these kinds of games often leave out features that I consider quality of life increases, and consequently, I enjoy them a little less. On the one hand, this game has a true sense of discovery and exploration. Local areas feel massive and layered, with many of them having caves, houses, and other areas you can explore full of secrets, powerful enemies, and interesting encounters. Skills are constantly being tested, and you can tell by my breakdown that the majority of them are useful. Even in heavily populated cities, you never know what's around the corner, but you are relatively sure it will be dangerous. So it's a ton of fun just setting out and seeing what's going to come next. The problem with this is there are no maps for 95% of the areas you visit. Consequently, I spent a large portion of the game feeling very insecure that I had actually seen everything on the map. There's no fog of war to reference and confirm that you have wholly explored an area. Again, many of these places feel massive the first time you go through them, and it's very hard to remember what turns you passed by when attempting to circle back and visit missed areas. I desperately wanted to map the entire campaign and usually couldn't get one. There's also no fast travel, and while I wouldn't call the global map massive, it's definitely sizable, and this is another feature I would have liked to have. Hold that thought, because we will circle back to it and how little the game holds your hand in the dislike section. Another aspect of the game that I am neutral on is party members. So on the one hand, the mechanics in this game are fantastic, and consequently, having party members who provide critical skills in combat and exploration feels great. I mentioned before that the art is phenomenal, and the portraits are no exception, providing all your party members with additional character. Each companion also has interesting core traits, and the game tries to flesh them out a little to make them distinctive people by providing insight into what makes them tick. Finally, I really appreciate that the game allows you to use 6 party members, which is actually the full amount of companions the game provides outside of mercenaries. It's great being able to just take my full roster with me at all times, and it makes a ton of sense considering the nature of the story. Unfortunately, there are a couple of issues that bring this area of the game down. While there is party member banter, it's always directed at the player and the situations you are experiencing. Consequently, companions do not develop any relationships with each other, and it feels rather strange. There are also no personal quests, or frankly, opportunities to dig more into who these people are. So the game will provide an interesting thread, such as a mercenary who's regretful for his previous actions, or a thief who is indebted to an organization that she desperately wants to break away from, but you are provided no opportunities to follow these threads and dig deeper into who these people are and what they have done. Even worse, Skald takes way too long to give you a full roster. Instead of providing you with the majority of party members up front and then giving one or two later in the adventure, all of your party members are slowly sprinkled in throughout the campaign. Consequently, you won't have your final companion until a couple of hours before the end, and the one before that will also come a couple of hours prior. This, on top of the lack of personal quests, made me feel disconnected from the overall group. They are an interesting bunch and fun to play with, but not particularly memorable outside of the daughter you have come to save. The last thing I am neutral on is that there is no voice acting in a game that is very text heavy. Of course, this doesn't bother me at all, but I know many of you find it to be a turnoff. I will say that most of what I read moved at a very brisk pace, and rarely did I feel like the game threw up a wall of boring text I had to sift through. Also, I think it's worth noting that this game comes from a very small indie developer who almost certainly doesn't have the budget to make all of these incredible characters fully voice acted. Quick note before we get into the dislike section. Here at Slandered Gaming, we focus on CRPGs. If that's the kind of content that interests you, or if you have enjoyed this review, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. Alright, finally there are some aspects of the game that I don't like. Keep in mind again, I got a version of Skald that is missing some updates, so the version all of you receive might have already cleared up many of these complications. There were a bunch of small issues that didn't really mar the experience, but they were notable. There's no way to backtrack during character creation, so if I made a wrong choice, I had to exit back to the start menu and start all over. When playing the game, there was no way to exit to the start menu, so I had to quit the game and then restart it if I wanted to do that. While an option is listed to rename saves, when I use it, nothing happens. So save games had generic names that oftentimes made it difficult to tell which one was actually my current playthrough. One of the high tier feat ranks was completely missing words, so I couldn't tell what it would provide. So basically, there's a small degree of jankiness that I felt with the game, and again, a lot of it will hopefully be cleared up in the version that you receive. Another problem that I know the developer does plan to address, but might not get to by the time the game releases, is a lack of recipes. I found a bunch of recipes for cooking, but virtually none for creating potions, so I had to discover them manually by seeing what different potions do and trying to mix them together. That's annoying but acceptable, and frankly, some people probably prefer it. A bigger issue is that it appears there's only recipes for low tier potions, and the higher rank ones can only be found in the environment or purchased. That feels very odd in a game that has a crafting skill, and it makes the overall potion making system seem a little half-baked. While traveling out in the world, you select one of your party members and that character becomes the team leader. Only that character's skill ranks count if the game presents you with a skill check. In many cases, I found this odd and a little frustrating. If you are in a dialogue and the game asks you to pass a healing check to figure out what type of injury a person has, it won't take into account that the cleric standing right next to you is a master healer. If your thief is presented with a lore check to determine if your party is knowledgeable about something, my mage cannot just chime in and help pass the check. This takes away from the feeling that a party is traveling together. I don't pretend this issue is unique to Skald. I have similar problems with Baldur's Gate 3 and other games, but it's worth pointing out here as well. Let's circle back to the game not holding your hand. I've already mentioned the lack of a map and fast travel. The absence of fast travel is made worse by the fact that the game throws a ton of random encounters at you when traveling the global map. The amount is reduced in some areas if you are able to complete a specific story mission, but obviously it takes quite a while to do that. Literally, it feels like every few steps when you are trying to reach a new location, a group of wolves or bandits will jump out at you. If you try to flee, the game will force you to pass an athletics or a stealth check, and you cannot choose or predict which one will pop up. Consequently, your thief might be leading and you are confronted with an athletics check that you fail and are forced into the encounter. You cannot rest while traveling the global map. You need to actually get inside one of the local maps first, and these random encounters can still be absolutely brutal. So sometimes just getting to a new map can be a serious ordeal. There are no random encounters on local maps, and I definitely appreciate that. On its own, this might not be too bad, but really, throughout the entire playthrough, it feels like there is too much combat. Take that with a grain of salt, because I play games for story, dialogue, and party member relationships, not combat. For some of you, the fights around every corner will be fantastic, but for me, it definitely started to feel like too much, especially towards the end. Another negative point about the game not holding your hand is how it deals with encumbrance. Skald provides a massive amount of loot, and much of it you don't want to sell or throw away. Arrows, potions, ingredients, and food are all useful, and all of them have weight. For the vast majority of your adventure, there is no access to a storage chest. Consequently, encumbrance is a big issue you are dealing with the entire game. If you become encumbered, you cannot move. Period. I am not sure if strength factors into how much you can carry, but even if it does, I never ran across any strength potions. So basically, if you are encumbered, you need to drop some of your gear. You can place items into looted containers, but I never used that because I always worried that I would come back and the gear would be missing. This was definitely a struggle by mid-game, and I think the experience would be better served by giving the player a permanent designated place to keep excess items. The last thing I don't like about Skald is the endgame. To be clear, this critique isn't about the actual ending. In the version of the game I was provided, the art from the ending scenes was missing. Honestly, I am a little confused by the ending, but again, I haven't seen it in the way the developer intended, so I cannot provide a real opinion one way or another. After seeing it properly, I might do a separate video providing my opinion on the overall narrative. My real critique is about the hour or so worth of gameplay that occurs before you get to the actual ending. Skald makes the mistake that I see many games make, where they upend what the player has done beforehand and provide an endgame about puzzles and completely different gameplay. Mind you, we are not talking about a Mass Effect 3 level of change, and the endgame puzzles are nowhere near the level of awfulness that, for example, Pathfinder Kingmaker provided. This is simple stuff that will be relatively easy for the vast majority of players to get through. The problem is, after spending 20 plus hours slashing through sinister monsters and fighting against a darkness that will potentially plummet the entire world into peril, when it's finally time to get the revelations on what the hell is actually going on, very few players will be interested in pushing around statues and trying to figure out puzzles, especially when there are literally no other puzzles in the entire rest of the game. The non-story part of the endgame feels like content that should have been in a side quest several hours back. That ends my review of Skald against the Black Priory. To recap, I think the writing, art, music, classes, combat, and exploration in this game are all absolutely fantastic. Even more importantly, this game truly comes off as a unique experience. You can take specific pieces and compare them with other games, but looking at the entire package, I'd be hard pressed to tell you Skald is very similar to another game that I have already played. We don't get many quality, unique properties in the gaming industry these days, and I am really happy to see a game like Skald get released. I hope the developer is able to continue making games and perhaps even provide a sequel. Obviously, this game has some drawbacks, including some simple bugs that might even be fixed by the time the game is in your hands, and some quality of life features that personally I think the game will be better served by having. There's also a tad bit too much combat, and the endgame doesn't focus enough on what's most likely important to the player by that point, in my opinion. Despite all this, I feel very comfortable calling this game a masterpiece. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Was this review helpful in getting a sense for the game? Do you plan on purchasing Skald? Is there any content regarding the game that you'd like to see from my channel? Looking forward to hearing your feedback, and I hope all of you enjoyed this video. Take care.